how to handle a public lynching. I must admit to you, my friends, I have a deep love for literature. Not that popular literature you find somewhere in the supermarket, but I'm talking about those who take the craft of writing seriously and view their vocation as a spiritual calling. I do not have time to read as much fiction as I would like, but I enjoy writers who engage the complexity of human nature and struggle with the difficulty of democracy juxtaposed with human tragedy. Writers such as James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Wole Soyinka, Zora Neale Hurston, Charles Johnson, Zadie Smith, Colson Whitehead, Alice Walker, and one of the premier writers of the 20th and 21st century, one of my favorite by the name of Toni Morrison. I love writers of depth and dimension, especially those who have been canonized in the lexicon of American literature. I like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville, Ernest Hemingway, Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe. But there was one writer who has recently been rediscovered. In a magazine called Oxford, they write about a gentleman who I enjoy reading his short stories and his novels by the name of William Faulkner. Faulkner, born and raised in Mississippi, is one of the few writers of the modern era who deals honestly with the issues of class and race. His books, Intruder in the Dust, Go Down Moses, Absalom, Oh Absalom, The Sound and the Fury, and his powerful collection of short stories use biblical imagery and Southern sensibilities to share with the reader a mythic but truthful mood of American life in the South. In his powerful short story entitled Dry September, he gives the reader a glimpse of the purpose and insanity behind the act of lynching. We listen as an ordinary, decent men are sucked into the vortex of half-truths, lies, and gossip promoted by a single entity or person. As the dialogue rolls on, Dr. Iva, and the people have this repeated sound bite of alleged crimes, truth becomes the casualty never to rise from her bed of affliction. The lie becomes a doctrine that people will defend even when presented with the truth. The truth is then treated as a lie because the lie has become the doctrine. Faulkner bravely sheds light on this shameful bit of history and shows that we are all affected by lynchings that go unchallenged. I must let you know that my own family, though I was not living, has been touched by the horrific history in America in reference to lynchings. My father and my Aunt Josie would tell me a story of a cousin we had by the name of Gilbert. Gilbert was lynched for no reason at all in LaGrange, Georgia, Troup County, Georgia, because there was a gentleman who was being beat brutally in front of a church, and another gentleman attempted to help him, and as a result, this man who was a white landowner was killed. They could not track the man down who had killed this white landowner, and then they stumbled up on my cousin. They took my cousin to jail, and then he was lynched. He was innocent, but lynched anyway. It was a public lynching, and no one came to his aid. You see, lynching has been a shameful part of American history. Lynching and the mentality which causes it has been a part of Faulkner's brilliant and tragic works. And lynching is also a part of our faith story. For the act of crucifixion is nothing but an ancient lynching. Lynching in the South was performed as an act of terrorism to silence prophetic voices, to demonstrate power over the marginalized, and punishment of crimes against the cultural norm. Roman crucifixion was a punishment to silence people who were threats to the state, to deter runaway slaves and stop people from breaking cultural norms. If you spoke out in Rome, you could be crucified. If you spoke out in Mississippi, you could be lynched. If you spoke out against just laws in Rome, you could be crucified. If you stood up against unjust laws in the South, you could be lynched. If you looked at a citizen of Rome in the wrong way, you could be crucified. If you looked at someone the wrong way in Mississippi, you could be lynched. Crucifixion and lynching served the same purpose, to destroy the human spirit and crush the hopes of the people. The tragedy of this text is, as I've heard one preacher state on Friday, the end of Jesus's ministry. His retirement from his earthly ministry ends with a lynching. The start of his disciples' ministry begins with a lynching. Can you imagine that the end of your ministry, when you're moving off the scene, you've got to deal with a lynching? Can you imagine when you are first starting out, hadn't even had an installation, but then you got to deal with a lynching? You should not start your journey with a lynching. You shouldn't end your journey with a lynching. It's understandable that there will be some lynching in between, but to start off at the beginning and to end with a lynching makes no sense. And this generation of preachers who were hanging out with Jesus, this next generation of ministers who had spent 3 years in setting captives free seminary under the guidance of the provost Yahweh, under the direction of Dean Emmanuel, working under Professor Paraclete and taking classes under the visiting professor by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, served on the faculty. The seminarians, the disciples, these young preachers, after a rigorous 3 years of field education, instead of a baccalaureate address, received a crucifixion commencement. There's a moment and connection to the one being crucified all of a sudden becomes national news.